If you're here, you already sense there's something out there, something magical and mysterious, just waiting for you to find. And you've probably already discovered it isn't as easy as just thinking happy thoughts. You're not alone. Generations of shamans, philosophers, seers, and scientists have pursued this eternal quest. Where their ideas come together, you'll find powerful tools to cultivate magic and self-mastery in your own life. Welcome to the Magic and Mastery Podcast. I'm your host, Donna Woodwell. I'm a former journalist and author, a master astrologer, and a hermetic initiate, and it's my honor to be your guide. In each episode, I'll meet you at the crossroads of science and spirit, reason and intuition, to help you discover the wisdom that works for you. Are you ready? The adventure awaits. Hello, and welcome to the Magic and Mastery Podcast. This is episode 11, A More Perfect Union, my astrology forecast for September 2020. Well, it's Virgo season again, and for me, that's always felt like back to school time. But clearly, this Virgo season is a bit more complicated than most, and it may leave us with more questions than answers. But hey, bright side, that just means there are plenty of things to meditate on as we move into the month ahead. And you'd be wise to make some time to do so, since your answers will shape the foundations of your experience for the next few months. But before I dive into the forecast, don't forget that I've added headings and timestamps to the show notes. And I've also uploaded the episode transcript to Medium, so there's a link for that too. Remember, you can find all of it in the show notes at www.magicandmastery.com/podcast. So let's get started. Now, with election season heating up in the United States, we do well to recall the preamble to the Constitution. We the people, in order to form a more perfect union. Now, it doesn't say a perfect union. It says a more perfect union. Perhaps that's in part because the framers of the Constitution understood that there can never be an agreement on what exactly perfect would look like. Now, imagine if the various states had insisted on their own version of perfect. If they'd swore it's my way or the highway, they'd never have established a union at all. Plus, it's that kind of all or nothing thinking that leads this month's Virgo energy spiraling down into ineffective anxiety and panic. Well, fortunately, by embracing imperfection, we can find the key to our own self-imposed prison. Think of it this way. Life's richness comes from its complexity and nuance. And those things aren't possible in a black and white either-or world. So, embracing imperfection may seem like odd wisdom for Virgo season, which runs from October 21st to September 22nd. After all, Virgo's got a reputation for wanting everything to be perfect. So much so that Virgo energy can drive itself and, well, everyone else nearby a little batty with a constant tweaking and shifting to get everything just right. Full disclosure, I know because I've got the sun and a collection of other planets in Virgo, so I'm speaking as a native. And so, when I found a wall plaque emblazoned with the words, "Embrace Imperfection," I knew I had to have it for my office. I even hung the sign crooked, just to make a point. Plus, it's amusing to watch the occasional client attempt to straighten it up and then read it and laugh at themselves. Anyway, I like having a little sign where I can see it because it reminds me every day that there's no such thing as perfect. There's only striving toward that elusive goal. Now, the word perfect comes from a Latin root that means complete or whole. But the wholeness Virgo craves can't be fulfilled on the material plane alone. Now, you see, in astrology speak, Virgo's ruling planet is Mercury, and that means the sign takes on the flavor of Mercury's dwelling place. Now, once upon a time, Mercury was known as the messenger of the gods, and in this role, he was given free rein to travel from the most high to the deepest abyss and all places in between. And because Mercury's inner sight still remembers what divine wholeness feels like when he's knocking about on the material plane in earthy Virgo, he's always trying his best to make the physical world more divine-like. Unfortunately for Mercury, that's like trying to add extra dimensions to three-dimensional objects. Easy? Not. So, to save sanity, relationships, and therapy bills, Virgo's energy is learning that it's the process of striving to be better that matters most. There is no perfect happy ending. And that's especially important to remember this September as tempers flare and patience wears thin. Now, why do I say that? Well, that's because feisty Mars is turning it up another notch as his biennial retrograde begins, and we'll all feel the heat. A little bit of astronomy for the uninitiated. Planets appear retrograde when they are in what's called perigee, and that's just a fancy astronomical term for when they are making their closest approach to Earth. So planets that are further away from the sun than the Earth is, that's like Mars, that means they also appear larger and brighter than usual in our night skies. But you don't have to take my word for it. It's a dance you can watch for yourself. Now, from our earthly vantage point, it looks like the red planet's been applying the brakes all through August, slowing down to a bare crawl by early September. And now, Mars is already bright enough to be visible even through light-polluted skies. I know that for sure because in the mornings when my dog wakes me up at like 4:30 a.m. for a walk, I can see Mars quite clearly shining brightly overhead. Makes up for the fact that I'm awake at 4:30 in the morning. Anyway, though his retrograde period officially begins on September 9th, he won't actually reach his maximum apparent brightness until a few weeks later on September 24th. By then, he'll be the second brightest star-like object in the sky after Venus, outshining even Jupiter. Well, the planet's going to be really hard to miss as we move further into the fall season. He rises in the east just a little earlier each night, and he'll soon dominate the evening skies as a brilliant reddish point of light. Now, in such moments, I can't help but hear echoes of Harry Potter's sky-watching friend Ronan the Centaur. Maybe you remember from the Sorcerer's Stone, when Harry and his friends are out serving detention with Hagrid in the Forbidden Forest. The group meets the centaur Ronan, and as they talk, Ronan is looking up at the skies and remarks, ominously, "Mars is bright tonight." Given that Mars was a god associated with strife and war and violence, we can assume that Ronan was foreshadowing Harry's role in the upcoming battle between Dumbledore's army and He Who Must Not Be Named. Given what's happening across the United States, it's hard not to make comparisons with Death Eaters on the loose. Nevertheless, reality is always more complicated than fiction. Well, and that's because people tend to see themselves as the hero of their own stories, rarely the villain. In other words, no one thinks of themselves as the Death Eaters. That role always goes to someone else. Alas, Mars retrograde is tough enough on its own, but this one's happening while the red planet is squaring off with another heavy hitter, Saturn. For traditional astrologers, there was no aspect tougher than the square between Mars and Saturn. And that's exactly what we've got in our cosmic plate for the next few months as the planets square off 3 times. The first time was on August 24th, and they'll meet again on September 29th, and one final time around January 13th of next year. We'll feel the squeeze the entire time as they're moving in and out of their alignment. Oh, and by the way, I looked it up. The first presidential debate is on September 29th, one of those square days. So it should be interesting to watch. Anyway, let's take a moment to get to know our players a little better. Now, in traditional astrology, Saturn and Mars are called the greater and lesser malefics. And that just means the malicious one. They get the moniker because the planets represent principles we humans often find unpleasant or challenging to work with, not because we don't need what they bring us to thrive. Saturn counsels self-discipline, solitude, patience, and maturity. Of course, those are great virtues to cultivate if you want to be successful in life. But I'm sure you can think of someone who will try whatever they can to get out of growing up. Unfortunately, the dark side of Saturn is extreme fear of the other. Fear that often leads to one's self-undoing. And that's actually the founding myth of the Greek version of Saturn. He was so afraid of his children rising up to defeat him that he ate them, which of course inspired the kids to rise up against him. So the question is, would they have risen up against their father if he hadn't been eating them in the first place? Now, on to Mars. Mars craves independence, self-determination, and opportunities to prove himself. Again, his courage can be a great virtue to cultivate. He's a reflection of the strength it takes to pick ourselves up and keep going. And Mars also loves competition and battle. For a sophisticated, well-schooled Mars, it's because the competition inspires him to be a better version of himself. But for the more thuggish variety, it's because he loves to win, and win at any cost. And that includes getting sidetracked in his own self-created struggles with invented enemies, spiraling into ineffective rage. Well, I'm sure you can imagine tons of ways these two could get into trouble together. And unfortunately, when we're talking about the collective behavior, the meeting of these two planets tends to correspond to moments when we see the worst of ourselves on display, especially when leadership is lacking to model a more positive alternative. Everyone goes into the battle feeling their cause is righteous, and no one gives up once the fighting begins. It creates an ever-escalating cycle of violence. But at least there's a little silver lining. As individuals, we can apply the power of our conscious awareness to steer a course between the rock and the hard place. Saturn doesn't have to give in to fear, nor Mars to violence. And the trap you especially don't want to fall into is feeling sorry for yourself or playing the righteous victim. Neither Saturn nor Mars has any patience for such things. Plus, both strategies will leave you stressed out and immune compromised, and you don't want that, do you? Anyway, your best approach is this. Be a hero. A real one. Well, what is a hero? And the classic definition is heroes are willing to take a risk for the sake of others, expecting nothing in return. To do that, you need to tap into the courage and strength of Mars and the determination of Saturn. Yes, it may feel like you are fighting an uphill battle. No, you may not see progress until you've had a chance to look back some months from now. But still, it is an opportunity to see what you are made of. So, roll up your sleeves and get to work. Both planets will applaud your effort. Now for the really hard question, the elephant in the room. How do you know if you're playing the hero or the villain? In other words, are you in Dumbledore's army or are you being a Death Eater? Now, the amazing thing about astrology is when the planets pose a question, they also suggest answers to the question, or at least a way to think about it. Let's take a look at another thing happening in the sky. Something that happened on the same day that the sun entered the zodiac sign of Virgo. The moon, the other big light in the sky, was hanging out in the zodiac sign of Libra. Now, Libra is also known as the sign of the scales. You know, the kind in the hand of statues of the goddess of justice. She uses them to weigh evidence in order to find a just and balanced solution. Listening to all sides, weighing the pros and cons, seems like a lost art in today's hyper-partisan atmosphere. But It's required work for justice to be done in the world. Now, you can't just dismiss those who don't agree with you, calling them stupid and brainwashed. And that's because we're all brainwashed from a certain point of view. You may not like to think about it that way, but our own circumstances and experiences color the way that we perceive reality. Every single person. In other words, we tend to see what we expect to see and what we want to see, not actually what is. And it takes time and bravery and humility to dig deeper to really find the truth in situations. And then, if you manage to do that, how do you know what the right choice is? Well, here's another clue. Libra's highest law is love, as befits its ruling planet, Venus, the goddess of love, harmony, and beauty. So it's a safe bet that if your actions are rooted in love and not fear, then they are at least tilting toward the good guys. Now, fortunately for all of us, the planet Venus is also in the conversation this month, opposing Saturn on September 2nd and squaring Mars on September 4th. So she's doing what she can to keep the struggle between Mars and Saturn from coming to blows. Still, it's not an easy road. Mars and Saturn are just itching for a battle. And though Venus can be the calm voice encouraging compromise, tolerance, and patience, she hates conflict and would prefer everyone just get along. But if she's willing to stand up and speak out, she may help the peacemakers to diffuse tensions, both personally and collectively. And finally, in the middle of September, there's one other pressure release valve, or maybe an escape hatch. In the weeks after the dreamy Pisces full moon on September 2nd, we'll be experiencing a Neptune opposition, as well as Jupiter stationing direct. Okay, yeah, I know, that's a lot of astrobabble in one sentence. So, what's it all about? Well, let's unpack it. A Neptune opposition is astronomy's name for a pivotal moment when the Earth sails between the Sun and Neptune. It's also the time when the Earth is closest to Neptune each year. And it brings Neptune's need to become one with all things to the foreground. And if that option's not available, Neptune will go out and seek a feel-good self-delusion just to keep from experiencing the pain of the harsh light of day. Now, and at the same time, Jupiter's ending his 4-month retrograde within hours of the Neptune opposition. It's as if Jupiter, the planet of optimism, integrity, and revelations, has been on vacation, but is now stumbling back into the office to get back to work. Now, Jupiter's been feeling a little bummed out from his time in Capricorn, but he's ready to take on the powers that be, represented by Pluto in Capricorn, one last time before he leaves for the fresher waters of Aquarius in late December. So, here's your challenge. Will you escape into your fantasies like a cosmic dose of opium? Will you use your fantasies to create monsters for yourself and make yourself even more anxious and afraid? Or will you allow your dreams, however faltering, to serve as the fuel to keep you moving forward on your heroic quest, no matter what the journey brings along the way? Now, astrologically speaking, the months ahead won't get any easier. Stress levels are likely to ratchet up even higher than they are now. And if that sounds horrific to you, well, then you most definitely need to come up with a plan to manage the increasing stress. And if this sounds like you, for this episode's experiment, I definitely recommend the Heart Math Institute's Heart Coherence Meditation. Now, research suggests that stress, anger, frustration, and other difficult emotions disrupt the heart rhythms in ways which impact the immune system and our overall well-being. But you can begin to smooth out these rhythms with this quick meditation practiced just a few times a day, or even in the odd moments when you're waiting on something else. It's actually super easy. All you got to do is focus on the area of your heart and then breathe gently through your heart. And as you are breathing in and out, remember something happy or positive from your life so that your heart feels like it's expanding. And just continue this for a couple of minutes. It's really that simple. Now, over time, this technique can help you calm your mind and the tendency to spiral off on all those negative thought loops that Virgo energy falls prey to. Plus, it'll help invoke a little bit more of that heart-centered Venus energy that can help soothe the savage beasts known as Mars and Saturn. If it can create just a little space to help you think more calmly and clearly and make better decisions, don't you owe it to yourself to give it a try? In the meantime, if you want to talk more about experiments like these, or dive deeper into the planetary energies, or just look at other ways to live a more magical life, you can always find me in my magical coven. Just go to www.magicandmastery.com/coven for more information. And of course, for timestamps and a link to this episode's transcript, don't forget to check out the show notes at www.magicandmastery.com/podcast. Well, thanks again for tuning into this episode of Magic and Mastery with me, your host, Donna Woodwell. And as I've said before, I love getting feedback. It helps me to know what makes you jazzed so I can provide more of the good stuff. So it would mean so much to me if you take a moment to rate and review this podcast. And if you like it, why don't you share it with a friend?